Great. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm so delighted that you chose to join us for this webinar today. Again, my name is Zandra Jordan. I direct the Hume Center for Writing and Speaking at Stanford University. And it's such a privilege and a joy, particularly in this season, to talk to you today about racial justice and online writing center praxis. You'll notice the backdrop for this title slide is a Black Lives Matter mural. This was painted outside of the City Hall in Palo Alto. And as we move along, I'll try to describe what's on the screens just for equitable access for everyone to these materials. So one of the first things that I think is important for us to do as we enter into this discussion about racial justice is to just find out who's in the room. So we want to do a roll call. We're asking you to tell us who you with. So we've got a poll that will invite you to respond to some questions. You will need to scroll down to answer each one. Please take a moment and do that so we get a feel for who's here. For the sake of the recording, I'd like to share what the poll questions are. Which best describes your online writing center this fall? What types of technology does your online writing center use? And select any that apply. There certainly may be others that are not included in the poll choices. And if your uses fall into an other category, would you drop a note into the chat so that we can know what you're responding to there? We'd love to hear a bit about the types of technology that you're using for your center that are not captured by question 2. Question 3, how do writers share their drafts, whether asynchronously or synchronously? Give us a sense of that, please. And again, if you're choosing other, would you drop a note into the chat and let us know more about that? What best describes your institutional context? Which of these classifications best fit your institution? And you can select more than one. And then let us know what your role is in your writing center. So we're at about 73% participation for the poll and climbing. So we'll give it another minute or two. And when we conclude the poll, we'll take a look at the results. So we're at 91% now, we're getting there. Just a few more minutes, we're almost there, 93% participation. All right, I think we can go ahead. Most have participated in the poll. I am assuming that everyone who wants to participate has done so. It looks like it has stabilized a bit in terms of responses. Oh, a few more are coming in. Let me pause a moment then. I'll give the poll one more minute, and perhaps this is a good time to tell you a little bit about why I'm wearing a Wakanda Forever t-shirt. One of the things that I see us doing in this webinar today is imagining the kind of world that we want to have. And what I appreciate very greatly about the movie Black Panther, perhaps some of you are familiar with it. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to see it. We lost the lead actor this year, Chadwick Boseman, to cancer. It was really unexpected because it was kept so private. And he went on about his business professionally and just really living and leading a full life. But I really appreciate the ways in which that film imagines a future that was untouched by colonization, particularly for Wakanda, this imagined African culture. And so it allows us to see what's possible when we are intentional about constructing spaces that choose to celebrate, to elevate, right, and uplift the experiences of those who are typically marginalized in mainstream society. And so I'm wearing this shirt today for a bit of inspiration. We're at 95% for our polls. I think that's a good percentage, and we can go ahead and end the poll here. But I'm hoping that you'll be inspired by this as well. So let's consider our results, who we have in the room. So most participants fall into the first two categories, that you have a fully online, synchronous video and or audio writing center. Some are only asynchronous in terms of review of drafts. A tiny percentage, just 3 of our participants, have hybrid on-site and online asynchronous consultations. All right. Types of technology. Nearly everyone is using video conferencing, some audio conferencing, right? Text-based chat is a part of that, a range of digital resources. And are we able to tell from the chat, Janelle and team, some of the other responses for this poll question? So other types of technology that are being used?
Yes, we have a few people saying that they're using WC Online or sharing screens via Zoom, using a platform called Cranium Cafe, using TimeTap, doing more share screen and emailing through Word.
Thank you.
Sure.
And so how writers are, right, we talked about how writers are sharing their drafts. We've got email, Google Doc, LMS. Most are using an online portal, and then we have some other categories there as well. Anything to add, Janelle?
Nope, I think it seemed to be mostly Google Docs and email was how people were sharing documents in the chat.
All right, and then when we look at institutional context, we see that the majority of us are from public colleges or universities, so 40% from private colleges and universities. We've got some representation from technical, vocational, or career colleges. And we also have participation among liberal arts. Hey, shout out to the Arts College who's repping that here today. And then our research universities are also represented. And then in terms of how we would classify ourselves, of course, this isn't a perfect list, but we do see that most of us are affiliated with PWIs. We've got some representation from HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions. Also, an individual repping a tribal college. Thanks for your presence here today. Also a single sex college. And then we also have participants from fully online colleges. Then in terms of our roles in our various centers, most of us are directors We also have some other center staff or admin. We've got professional tutors, graduate student tutors, and undergraduate student tutors. Thank you so much for letting us know who's in the room. I like to ask this question or pose these poll questions because it's important as we move into our consideration of racial justice that we think about it in relation to our own context. So in light of the national landscape, but specifically we want to apply what we're going to discuss today in our individual context. So let's move forward a bit. I want to talk to you briefly about some of the things that are informing my own practice as a way of providing a frame, a theoretical frame for what you could choose to employ in your own context. And so I start here with a statement from the 4Cs Black Caucus, and it reads, as Black language and rhetoric scholars, we are outraged at the unceasing state-sanctioned violence that continues to snuff out Black life. Protest is essential to the Black rhetorical tradition, and we stand with those who are using their voices and bodies to resist white supremacy and demand accountability. So we are, through this webinar, aligning with this particular value and call to be a part of resisting oppression and specifically white supremacy, right? That this is a work in which we can engage as a field, and those who would align with this particular call from the Black Caucus. So I want to share some part of my frame. Opposite this statement, you'll see the cover for Rolling Stones, which is an image of protest. So something else informing the frame here, I went just a little too far, excuse me. Something else informing the frame here is an understanding and between racial justice, right, and anti-racism. So racial justice or racial equity certainly goes beyond anti-racism. So what we're talking about today is not just the erasure of anti-racism, but the promotion of racial justice. And so here's a statement from the NEA on racial justice in education. It's a resource guide. And they say it is not just the absence of discrimination and inequalities, but also the presence of deliberative systems and supports to achieve and sustain racial equity through proactive and preventive measures. That's what we want to talk about. How can we be proactive? How can we be preventative? We may certainly feel like, hey, anti-racist view, I don't hold racist views. That's not what we advocate in our center. But we recognize that that's not fully enough, that we need more, right? And so we'll be talking more specifically about how we can model for promoting racial justice.
Sandra, just so you know, you're cutting in and out a little bit with your audio.
Okay, I'm cutting out a little bit.
Yes, maybe turn your video off and that might help with the bandwidth.
Okay, let me do that. I'll take a moment to do that, everyone.
Let me see, let me make you, turn your video is still on, try turning it off and see if that helps.
All right. Just one moment here now, I need to get back to. Sorry about that, everyone. There it is.
Okay, everybody else says you sound better. You sound better.
I sound better? Excellent. All right. Okay, there we go, great. So I was just trying to explain the difference between, I'm seeing a little pop-up here that my internet connection is unstable. I hope that this works out for us. But I just wanted to note a distinction between racial justice and anti-racism. And we don't just want to advocate the erasure of racism, but also be deliberate and intentional in promoting racial justice. Opposite the statement on the screen from the NEA is an image of a Black Power fist with the Say Their Name logo, and it includes the names of several individuals, Black and brown individuals, who were murdered, of course, unjustly. So what I'd like to share with you is an ethic that I'm using in my own center around the promotion of racial justice, and present this as a frame for and a model for how you might construct an ethic for your own center. You're certainly welcome to employ this one. As I move forward, I'll talk about ways in which it can be used in a variety of contexts. So let me tell you briefly that womanist ethics is a critical moral standpoint and for anti-racist writing center practice. That's how I am applying it, right? Womanist ethics comes from a tradition of Black women theologians who were advocating for a space to center their voices and experiences for liberation. And I'm adapting this methodology for writing centered praxis because I really believe that it provides an opportunity for us to understand some of what's possible when we choose to center the marginalized. And this particular ethic has several facets, but one thing to know holistically about it is that it's aimed at the liberation of all people, but it begins with, it centers the epistemologies, the ways of knowing and understanding of Black women. So you'll see here at the top of this screen, a mural that features, rest her soul, Breonna Taylor. You may have seen or heard news about her recently because indictments that were made against the officers who were responsible for her death actually did not name her. They were not found to be culpable for her murder, but she was murdered in her own home. We could call it sleeping while Black. There are so many things that are occurring, particularly at a heightened rate, and we're certainly taking more notice to it now, but it's ongoing. And we're seeing a series of incidents in which Black people in particular are losing their lives for doing normal everyday things. And in this instance, she was in her own home and was gunned down by officers issuing a no-knock warrant. There's some dispute about whether or not they announced themselves. And it turned out to be a faulty interaction. So one thing to note here, in a womanist garden, every person matters. Womanist theology is aimed at supporting all oppressed communities. So let's hold that in mind as we move forward. So here's the first part of this ethic, and it's called radical subjectivity. You'll notice this mural is of Sandra Bland. Sandra Bland was driving, my understanding is actually on her way to a job interview in another area when she was stopped by police for a minor concern in traffic, just driving, and a minor concern. And she ended up being arrested, taken to jail, and she died in prison, and the conditions around her death are quite suspicious. This ethic of radical subjectivity says that there are ways that Black women who are choosing to see themselves as responsible and serious and in charge are resisting tripartite oppression, which occurs in every facet of society. So it's a recognition that being Black, being whatever gender one identifies with, and also class, that those identities, those positionalities intersect in ways that are extremely oppressive for Black women. And this ethic of radical subjectivity says, I refuse to be a victim. So that refusal then is making the choice to do something about it, to claim a sense of agency in opposition to hegemony. So it requires an evolving sense of conscientization. If we look at Paulo Freire there, we get a sense of that concept. It's becoming more fully aware of one's own being and worth. Traditional communalism expresses a commitment to work that liberates the entire community. So it's not just about one's individual liberation and growth, but there's concern for the entire community. And in womanish culture, this really means that we're drawing upon tools for elucidating all of these rich complexities of Black folk life. It's shifting the narrative to understand that universally we can see the ways in which the Black community is traditionally capable. We know that there are lots of narratives that continue to circulate that are hard to snuff out around deficiencies that African Americans bring in terms of their literacies, bring to the classroom, bring to the academy. And this ethic is saying, let's shift that, right? Let's change that narrative and understand the universal traditional aspects and ways in which the Black community is traditionally capable. We see in the mural here, this is George Floyd. We know that he was murdered this summer by police officers, and very graphic portrayal there of an officer pressing his knee into Floyd's neck. And, you know, that's difficult really even to talk about. But what we want to move toward here is an understanding that the experience of George Floyd, he was not the first to say, "I can't breathe." There's an echo there, a resonance there with that call, that cry that has occurred from other voices, other spaces in the community. The next part of this ethic is redemptive self-love. And redemptive self-love rejects perceptions of Black women's bodies, their ways, their loves as vile. So it's this commitment to reclaiming your truer self. Here are the narratives around standards of beauty, who's intelligent. We might even say, in applying this toward our writing center work, who can do this work? Who do we envision when we think about directors, the tutors? Who do we envision when we think about who needs to be tutored, who needs support? Right? We certainly want to expand those images and narratives. And this ethic is about reclaiming a truer sense of self. We have in the mural here a picture of a Tatiana Jefferson, and a neighbor called the police when they noticed that the door of her home was ajar. So they called for a welfare check. Police showed up, did not announce themselves, and ended up killing a Tatiana Jefferson. And so they were indicted on charges of murder. And then we have critical engagement. And this ethic, you know, it makes no compromises. So what we're saying here is that we are promoting racial justice to the fullest degree, the fullest extent possible. And that's where we're aiming for justice, for freedom, equality, and we're taking seriously the tripartite oppression that Black women and other marginalized people experience, right? You'll see in the mural here, this is a mural of Ahmaud Arbery, who was murdered jogging while Black. He was simply out for a jog. And a father and son who were white jumped in their car. They went after him. They assumed that he might be the person who had been burglarizing that neighborhood, and they hunted him down and killed him. Looking for my cursor here to get to the, there we go. So here's how all of this comes together for me. Womanist ethics as a critical moral standpoint for anti-racist online writing center praxis. And I have online in parentheses here because I really believe that this model can be applied to both face-to-face and online centers. But I do encourage you to keep this in mind. You'll see another mural of George Floyd at the top. So briefly, here are these points. You know, tutors should reflect the diverse demographics of the student body. And we know that that poses a challenge because we're fighting against these enduring narratives about roles, stereotypes, who belongs in our centers, who doesn't, who does the work of our centers. And so there is a challenge here, but it is one that I think is worthy of us taking seriously and not just dismissing and saying, oh, well, we can't get people to apply. Oh, we have such a small number of students of color. You know, what can we do with what we have? It's vitally important that our tutors, our staff reflect the demographics of the student body. And so we need to work intentionally toward that, both in terms of the tutors, but also the administrators. And I encourage you to think about your particular role, your status at your institution in your center, and how you can be a part of instituting this change, of bringing about this change. The training curriculum should center racial literacy and racial justice. So we need a growing and expansive understanding of how to have conversations about race with others, both within our groups and outside of the groups with which we identify. We know that talking about race can be uncomfortable, but it's important to have a healthy sense of risk-taking. It's something that I try to encourage in my own center, that we don't want to shy away from conversations about race, particularly in this season, right? When we are recognizing now more than ever, because the pandemic has grounded many of us, and it means that we have a more sustained gaze on what's happening around racial injustice throughout the country. You know, there's something happening now where it's more difficult to turn away, right? Or to turn it off, or to move on to the next thing. Oh, that's awful, that's horrendous, we might note, but then pretty quickly we get sucked back into the regular routine of our very demanding jobs. And what we're suggesting here is that we want to be sure that we don't turn away, that we keep it centralized. So one way to do that is to make racial literacy and racial justice a central part of your training curriculum, and not just an addendum to it by adding on a reading or two, but thinking about how reframing, restructuring your training curriculum could promote racial justice, right? So making that a core value of what you do through your center. And then tutor feedback, the ways through our collaborative dialogic interactions with tutors. How can we, through those interactions, convey an appreciation for linguistic diversity, right? In what we say in response to students' writing, how we evaluate their writing, the suggestions that we make, the opportunities that we take to affirm what they're already doing exceptionally well, and to appreciate the rich rhetorical traditions that all of our writers bring, right? Tutors should honor writers' preferences around using video or audio. That's just something to keep in mind, particularly in our online tutoring environment. So the video, you know, it is a window into someone's lived space, their environment, and there may be many reasons why it would be better for them to have their video off. And I encourage you to maintain some flexibility for writers who may prefer just to use audio. As we've seen during this webinar, sometimes we do have challenges with the internet strength, with technology more generally as well. And we might need to go to alternative modes, right? Such as speaking by phone, and just utilizing audio there, along with a Google Doc or other formats, other types of technology that you might be using. So I'm just suggesting that there are ways in which people may be feeling, especially surveillanced at this time, and having some sensitivity for those who may prefer not to be on video. And then tutors should engage in discussions about race or racism and language attitudes. And we have opportunities for that, right? One that comes to mind for me, I've seen this quite a bit in our center, where writers come in with a great deal of frustration as they are trying desperately to meet the demands of their professors, of their course instructors. And when I look at their writing, when we look at their writing, we recognize that things that they are being penalized for are fairly minor. And they tend to be features that are very difficult to remove from writing and even from oral communication, such as article usage. And that's an opportunity to talk to a writer about language attitudes and how they vary, right? Not necessarily to question a professor or instructor's choices about grading. We don't do that. But I do think it's important to help writers understand what's at stake with the choices that they make as writers and what's available to them, and that not everyone views their languages, their traditions, their practices in the same ways. All right. So this ethic that I've shared to you, it certainly comes out of and grows out of a Black womanist tradition. It's one that appeals strongly for me because in addition to directing a writing and speaking center, I'm also an ordained minister. I studied womanist theology in seminary. I very much value the tenets of this moral standpoint. But I do believe that it has great potential for application to online writing center work and face-to-face writing center work. And if it appeals to you also, I just want to share that it is something that you could use in your own space. So there it is possible in solidarity with and on behalf of Black women who have made ethics like this possible, theories like this possible, that you can employ it in your own work and be a part of what's happening here. At the top, before I move to the next screen, I do want to note the mural here. It says "Do the Right Thing" at the top, and it's a picture of Eric Garner, who we know preceded, really was the first to issue that call that became a protest cry for breath. I can't breathe. And he was choked to death when an officer used an illegal chokehold in subduing him. So now it's time for you to think about how you can craft your own anti-racist ethic, right? One of the principles for online writing instruction, the first one that we have through CEES, through our professional organization, right, is that online writing instruction should be universally inclusive and accessible. This is most often talked about in terms of accommodations for disability, but not really in terms of racial justice or promoting anti-racism, right? And this is what I'm inviting you to think about now. If we share this ethic, how can we create an anti-racist, racially just ethic for our own local context? And I want you to take a moment and think about that now. How can you, in your own center, account for racial justice? Here's how we're going to do this. I've created some Padlets for us to use. It's an online tool that allows for collaborative sharing, that we can type comments into a doc at the same time and see those comments and respond to those comments live. I do want to note, this is my second time leading this webinar. And the first time, the Padlets were so generative that it became clear to me and to the participants that it would be very helpful for the field for these insights to be represented anonymously and in aggregate, right, for the larger field. So that's what I'm proposing to do here through these Padlets. So please note when we go to the Padlets that all of the posts will be anonymous. And it is my hope after the webinar to summarize these responses, which are anonymous, as a group, and then be able to present these insights to the larger field in a future publication. There's an alternative way of engaging here if you don't want to participate in the Padlets, and that is through the chat. And the chat will not be summarized now or in the future. So that is just a space for sharing your comments, your ideas, if you would prefer that, rather than engaging with the Padlets. Right. So I'm going to stop share on this screen so that I can share with you the Padlets and give you a sense of where we're going to begin. And Janelle, if you would drop the URLs for the Padlets into the chat. We are starting with, let me show you the first one that we're beginning with. One second, everyone. All right. We are almost there. Here we are. And so this Padlet, you will notice, it says, describe your racial justice values or commitments in these areas and any steps that you have taken or will take toward their manifestation, right? And so the URL for this Padlet, the link there should be in the chat. If you could go ahead and join this Padlet. There are several categories: linguistic diversity, racial literacy, representation, tutor training and praxis, and then other. And the way to use the Padlet is to click on the plus sign underneath each of the headings, and then you type in a comment that comes to mind for you. So we just want to take about 10 minutes to think about this.
Sandra, attendees are saying that they do not see the plus sign underneath the categories, and it's asking them that they need an account in order to do that.
Oh, they should not need an account.
Someone says they logged in with a Padlet account too and still do not see it.
Okay, let me see what I can do here. Let me stop share a moment.
Someone says you might need to enable posting on the categories.
Okay, let me be sure that, let me see if that is enabled. One moment, everyone. I do encourage you to think about this while I am getting this together. You know what, let's do this. Could we, why don't we go ahead and take our 5-minute break here, and that'll give me a moment to sort this out. And then when we come back from our break, we can continue. Would that be okay?
Yes, that's perfectly fine. Let's take our 5-minute break, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience, everyone. I see you already beginning to post in our first Padlet. Thank you so much for doing that. I'll try to narrate it a bit as we go along. So we're taking about 10 minutes for this. And again, we have the 5 categories: linguistic diversity, racial literacy, representation, tutor training and praxis, and an other category. What are your racial justice values or commitments in these areas? Are there any steps that you have already taken or steps that you plan to take? to make those values and commitments a reality in your center? Seeing some great things here. So actively working with tutors and Writing Center colleagues to recognize the interconnections between race, language, culture, and expression. Presenting arguments for code switching. And then challenge those ideas by presenting works from Hooks, Young, Baker Bell, and others. Valuing different linguistic experiences. Emphasizing communication as an inclusive process. Working with other faculty to move beyond over-reliance on formatting conventions. Yeah, that's important. Celebrating linguistic diversity. Outreach to faculty. Assigning writing across borders to all tutors who work with English language learners at your PWI. Making an effort to hire students that represent the racial and ethnic diversity of your center. Encouraging students who attend your workshops to come to the Writing Center. Oh, wow. So stop requiring GPAs for tutor applications and make the tutors an integral to the interview process. Absolutely. I'm working hard on recruiting writing tutors who are people of color and Black, and those who use other varieties of English. Absolutely. Outreach to faculty. Undergrads take a course before they can become tutors. Sharing your own experience as a first-generation immigrant with ELL parents. Targeted recruitment of racialized tutors and interactive debriefing with them. You know, and I think that's so important, that debriefing, right? Because so we certainly want to be sure that we are diversifying our tutoring staff, that we are being very intentional, and I would even say targeted in our recruitment. But it's not enough just to bring them into the door, right? Because we want to be sure that they have opportunities to flourish in that role, that they are able to thrive as tutors like the rest of the staff. And we may need to implement some additional proactive steps to ensure that that happens. One of the things that I have witnessed at my own center is ways in which Black women tutors in particular have met a great deal of resistance. And I'm referring to young women who are incredibly bright and well-trained and capable, and you know, they came highly recommended, but have had some experiences with writers, with clients, if you will, who were intentional in trying to demoralize them. And that speaks to a facet of institutional culture and the need to change up some policies, ways that we approach our beyond the training curriculum that we hold, you know, there are these opportunities for practicing tutoring as a tutor in training. And when I noticed those things occurring for Black women that were not happening with some of our other tutors, you know, it really marked for me that a practice that had been ongoing at our site, it predated me, my arrival, that it, you know, it works fine for some tutors, but not well for, particularly for tutors of color and Black women specifically. So we want to think about what kinds of institutional and also cultural changes might be needed to fully realize some of our commitments. In the other category, we've got speaking with professors about assignment guidelines, normalizing speaking to professors about racial justice guidelines that might not be represented in the classroom, educating professors on unconscious bias. Thank you. As a young student and writing specialist of color, considering how I might be able to relate and form a sense of unity with writers of color who come in for help and may be facing certain disadvantages. You know, I think that's really, that comment speaks to one of the reasons why it's so important that we do have that representation. Racial justice is everybody's problem, right? It can't just be on the shoulders of staff of color and tutors of color. It's everybody's, it should be everybody's mission, everybody's labor and effort. But it really does matter, that representation, right? There's something that happens when you walk in and you see someone who looks like you, who is a tutor, rather than only seeing those who look like you being helped and supported. And that help matters, but we want to be conscious about how we can begin to change that narrative, right? And there is a way that you can open up and share more when you have that representation there. Thank you so much. So I think we may be ready to shift now to our next Padlet. Is that the case? Could you give us some thumbs up? Thumbs
Yes,
up to let us see? Okay, excellent. Are you now able to see my screen? It should be a black backdrop.
Yes.
Excellent. This one says, describe the racially just future that you want to see for your online writing center. Write your vision. So what I'm inviting you to do now is use the values, the commitments that you just generated on the other Padlet to help you craft a vision for this racially just future that you want for your own center. So let's take a moment now and write that out. What is it? What is that vision? Name it if you can. To add a comment on this Padlet, you click on the plus sign in the lower right-hand corner. All right, just a little of what I'm seeing here. One vision is for the Writing Center to be a place that is not one size fits all, but where students can self-determine their writing goals and tutors will be informed and educated to work with them on those goals. I want students at my university to see themselves in the tutors or consultants that serve them. I want the students to recognize that they are all welcome and wanted and that our center is a judgment-free zone. That's beautiful. We're making good strides, but we have a long way to go. Equal means everyone is getting the same thing at the same time and in the same place. I hope to see that our center becomes, sorry, that one jumped. Let me read another one. I envision a future where every student's natural voice and vocabulary are considered professional and academic. Wouldn't that be beautiful? I see a world of academia that encourages an understanding of many different styles of English rather than demands universal conformity to one standard English. Amen. I hope to see that our center becomes not only a place of learning, but also one of acceptance and advocacy. It's so important for students to have a variety of outlets on campus and safe spaces. I feel the one where you are getting writing assistance that should be included in that. I feel the one where you are getting writing assistance should be included in that. Yes, thank you. If you've already posted your comment to this Padlet, I invite you to think now about steps that you can take to begin manifesting this vision. So what are some of the things that you'll need to do to start working toward this goal? It can feel so huge that it's difficult to figure out where to start, but it's important that we do start somewhere. So think about what's the low-hanging fruit? What are the particular things that you would need to do to begin realizing this vision for your center and for your institution? You can add on to your statement, use the comment feature to add on to the statement that you posted and list some steps that can be taken. Anything that comes to mind for you. How will you start working toward this vision? I love this one. I hope to see our center becomes not only a place of learning, but also one of acceptance and advocacy. It's so important for students to have a variety of outlets on campus and safe spaces. I feel the space where you are getting writing assistance. Did I just read that already? I think I read that one earlier. I must really love it. I've had writers ask me how to become a writer consultant themselves. Hearing them ask this makes me think they not only found value in the session, but can see themselves as a writing consultant, that writing consultants are not experts, but people who use writing centers as well, a community of writers they can and want to join. That's right, and we want to normalize that experience. So see if you can list 2 or 3 actions, 2 or 3 things that you could do to begin working toward the vision that you've posted. If you've already listed some action items, think about which one you might want to do first. Where does it make sense to begin or start? Let's take a few more minutes. All right. Mm. So someone wrote, I want my center to be one where students of all races and ethnicities are sure they will be welcomed and supported, where students feel comfortable about bringing whatever writing struggle they feel they are having and find someone who will have a supportive conversation that begins with the student's concerns. And their action item is they feel it starts with the face of the writing center, who students see. Right. So if you have tutor hires coming up, uh, likely at some point this year, thinking about how you begin to change those faces, or also how you make other faces more visible, the diversity that you already have among your staff. How can you make that more visible? Thinking about that as well. I see also reviewing calls to action during regular team meetings, outreach to the campus community. This is a nice one. Owning when I felt uncomfortable or made mistakes. So tutors will see that I am willing to continue challenging my own biases and see my willingness to grow and change. Absolutely. You know, we all have some biases because racism, particularly institutional racism, is connected to power and not everyone has it. You know, I don't see everyone as being equally capable of racism, but that everyone has biases. That's my particular understanding of it. I envision a writing center that plays a role in the institution by creating opportunities for all kinds of conversations about linguistic justice and its role in creating social justice. I'd love to know, how might you get started on that? What are your thoughts? So how about one more minute here? I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint. Give me a moment. Well, thank you so much for taking a moment to engage in those activities. I just want to underscore what we've been doing through the Padlets is really in a collaborative way reflecting on what our values and commitments are around racial justice and anti-racism, and then beginning some visioning, right? Well, what kind of center do we want to have? What kind of center do we see or imagine based upon our values and commitments? And then we consider, well, what are some actions that we can implement? What are some concrete steps that we can take to start working toward those visions, right? So now what we want to do is have an open conversation. We've already had our break. Janelle, would you like to review these?
So it'll be Elle reviewing them.
I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. Thank you, Zandra, for some great activities. I think it will fuel some good discussion. So we'll now engage in the discussion and begin wrapping up about 10 minutes before the end of the webinar. You can keep posting questions in the chat and we'll read them off to Zandra. If you'd like to ask a question via audio or sign language, you can just click the raise hand icon and then wait for the host to indicate your turn and to unmute you. Please begin your turn by giving your name. Next slide, please. So to find the raise hand icon, what you do is you hover over the bottom of the Zoom screen and click the participants icon. And this will make the participants panel appear on the right side of your screen. And then you can do the raise hand icon. It's the first icon listed.
Whoops. Okay, I think we are ready.
Yes. Any questions? We don't have any in the chat at this time.
Okay.
Lucia says, thank you for modeling specific language tutors can use to find a way to demonstrate to tutees that professors' unequivocal upholding of standard written English is problematic.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
She says, if you've got more, I welcome it. Another attendee says, I wonder if you can speak a bit about gaining institutional support.
You know, that's such a great question and a challenging one. I think in writing studies in particular, often what we have to do is kind of do the thing and then ask for permission on the back end, because we know we often exist in at the lower rung, unfortunately. I was looking for a better way of describing it, but if we think about the history of writing centers often being housed in basements of buildings, kind of tucked away out of sight, you know, we're not often thought about as the places where the real intellectual work occurs. And, you know, that could be a little different based upon your institutional type. So I certainly want to allow for that. But if it has been your experience where academic support at your institution is not as valued as work in the disciplines, or perhaps writing isn't even viewed as a discipline, as a legitimate field of study, I think that makes it particularly challenging when we're thinking about institutional support. So one of the things that I would recommend is really leveraging this moment that we're in, because we're seeing around the country a greater interest in attending to issues of diversity and equity and inclusion and racial justice. We know that racial injustice, that racism is long-standing, right? So it's not new. But because the most recent protests, the most recent public protests against violence, police violence against Black bodies, has been televised, and we've been at home, many of us, most of us, and have seen it, right, live. Now we're having a greater response. And so my suggestion would be to use this moment. Don't let it pass you by. Don't let it pass by your center or your institution, and find a way to start with raising attention or focusing attention on the issue through your center. So someone said for their vision that they would like for their center to become a place that's not just about tutoring, but it's also about promoting those kinds of changes, the changes toward around social justice, racial justice, social change through their center. And if that's the case, I would say now is a good time to try something. So what could that look like for you? Are you going to hold an event, perhaps co-sponsor an online event with another group on your campus, and you start doing the work so that you begin to shift the way that your center is identified, and people get a feeling, oh, wait, this writing stuff, it's much more expansive than just fixing somebody's paper, right? That's not what we think we're doing anyway, right? But it's not just about commenting on somebody's paper, right? But this work that we do in collaboration with other writers is connected to our larger democratic project, right? Where we are helping people gain facility with the types of communication needed to live and operate more justly in this world. That's extremely important. How do we help our campuses? How do we help our institutions recognize that as a part of what we do? I think we've got to talk about our work in that way. And we start creating those kinds of events and engagements with students and invite the campus to participate. That's one response, just one response. But I'd love to know if there's any follow-up to that. And I also see a few additional comments in the chat.
Yes. One of our next questions was, I love what Zandra said about it not being enough just to bring diverse tutors in the door. Do you have specific suggestions for offering them continual support as they do the work of tutoring?
Yes, absolutely. And it's something that I'm working through right now, which is being intentional and consistent in checking in on all of the tutors, but particularly our students of color who are new to the center, because the campus is also, the institution is also relatively new to these increases in staff of color. So checking in with them about their experiences, asking them how it's going, right? And so just keeping your finger on the pulse or the culture of your center and how that is developing, I think is a really important part of this process. Also, I mentioned earlier, I don't know if other centers do this as a part of your tutor training, if you have a formal tutor training curriculum, but a part of ours, our tutors take a course. We're on the quarter system. They take a course in the spring, and part of that course is conducting observations of our current tutors, and then something called a tutor takeover. Now, let me just say I inherited that practice, right, when I came on as director of the center. And what I have learned as I have worked to diversify our tutoring staff is that those, quote, takeovers don't work for everybody. And even if we kind of think about it a little bit in terms of, the more I think about it, it sounds pretty colonial. We're taking over. And whose embodiment lends them to that practice, and for whom would that be a barrier? That's something that I'm having to think about.
as I diversify our tutoring staff, and we just need a different way of giving tutors exposure, right? And to call it something else, because I have observed that it doesn't work, particularly for Black women tutors. So the general practice there is a student has booked an appointment, they show up for their appointment, a tutor in training goes and they ask for permission to, quote, take over the session and then lead it. The regular tutor, the more seasoned or veteran tutor, is there also and can assist as needed, but it's meant to be an opportunity for practice and growth. So that's an important goal, but what has happened is that Black women have been denied, you know, whereas their counterparts have a much easier time with students saying, oh yes, sure. So there's more trust from the writers that this person coming in to take over the session is equipped to do it. And we've also had the experience of a writer, unfortunately, using it as an opportunity intentionally to demoralize, to dispirit the tutor. And so I just cannot allow those kinds of things to continue, right? And it's important to note patterns, you know, that that's happening for a particular group of tutors and not for others. What is that about, right? So we have to be willing to acknowledge these practices that are taking place, the violence they do. And as much as we want our writers to be welcomed, we also need for tutors to be welcome and safe in the space also. So my response there is to take a look at your current practices and consider ways in which they may be disadvantaging some tutors, right? And then be open to modifying or changing those practices, right? You might want to do it in conversation with the tutors. I had to work hard not to lose the tutor who had that very traumatic experience of being demoralized. And I'm talking about a very well-qualified graduate student tutor who is brilliant. You know, it should not have happened. And no one deserves that. Could you give me another question, please?
Sure. This one has had a few people have said they'd like this one answered too. So Grace asks, I was wondering if you could talk about how tutors can approach tutoring appointments when the tutee might be writing something hostile about a group that the tutor themselves belongs to. For example, a student who is writing an argumentative paper that has anti-immigrant tones and the tutor is an immigrant themselves. It seems institutionally irresponsible to ask tutors to help no matter what and give students the benefit of the doubt all the time when their own identities are being attacked.
I very much agree. One of the things that we do, so the center at my institution is for writing and speaking. And so because we offer tutorials in both areas, writing and oral communication, we hold cross-tutor trainings throughout the year on topics that we believe are appropriate for all of our tutors. And one of those topics is triggers in tutoring. It's a session that I designed to speak to this issue that you've just raised. And that is, what do we do when writers bring in some text that is triggering for us? And it could be for a variety of reasons, right? We often think about, so we've heard about trigger warnings, right? And we often give those warnings to give people the option to not participate in that particular conversation, or to choose an alternative if participating would do some violence or harm, reinscribe some trauma for them. With tutoring, the challenge is depending upon your center and how it is structured, we may not know before the student shows up with the writing what they are working on. And if we don't know, there's less leeway for that kind of trigger warning. So what we talk to tutors about is you have every right to say, this topic is triggering for me and I would like to refer you to someone else. We'll get you scheduled with another consultant. Because it is important that we safeguard our tutors as much as we do our writers, right? So we're not saying we can't help you, but that this is triggering for me. And if you don't want to make that explicit acknowledgement, you could just say, I'm so sorry, but I have a conflict has arisen for me, or an emergency, however you would like to frame that. I need to end this session, but before I do, I'm going to get you scheduled immediately with someone else. Could you give me a moment to do that? And so I believe it's okay for the tutor to excuse themselves from a session. We are not obligated to remain in any situation that would do harm to us. So that's one response that I would offer. If someone feels like they can stay, they just have an opposition to the particular argument, then I think we could talk about what are some ways of helping the writer to understand readers' perspectives, various readers' perspectives, right? And so the tutor, if they feel that they can remain in the session without being traumatized by it, then they could go on and have a conversation with the writer and say, I see that you have taken up this topic or you are taking this particular approach. You know, one of the important things to do in our argumentation is to be sure that we take seriously counter arguments. And there are some ways that others might respond negatively to this argument that could shut down conversation. Have you thought about counter viewpoints? How are you accounting for that in this argument? Let's talk about some ways that you can. At a former institution where I directed a writing center, it was a theological institution. So students were writing about theological matters, writing about God, writing about sacred texts. And a student was writing about her perception of who God is. And she described God as a round Black woman, that she took comfort in that kind of image. She took comfort in an image of God as a round Black woman. And I said to her, you know, I appreciate you sharing this draft with me. I do want to point out your description of God here sounds like a mammy figure. Have you thought about that? Are you familiar with it? And she thought, oh my gosh, I hadn't even considered that. So let's talk about that, how that's potentially problematic. So I see what you're reaching for. And so we had an open conversation about it. That does involve some risk, right? If we choose to address it rather than not say anything, to ignore it, and we just, let me just help you with your transitions, you know, whatever the other concerns around the writing might be. But I think we have an obligation not to just let these things go. It goes back to my earlier comment about contributing to a larger democratic project in which we are helping writers in their formation as engaged, culturally aware citizens who are accountable for how they interact with other people. Maybe one more?
We actually need to wrap up for the interpreters, if that's okay.
Got you.
Can you bring up the last 2 PowerPoint slides, please?
Sure.
All right, so just the next, yep. Okay, so thank you to everyone for attending our webinar today. Thank you to Zandra L. Jordan for her work in preparing this presentation. And thank you to More Interpreting for being our interpreters today. Next slide, please. Our next webinar is coming up on October 26th from 3 to 4:30 p.m. EST. Eric Camarillo will present on enacting anti-racism and asynchronous writing consultations. You can register for this webinar on our website at onlinewritingcenters.org/webinars. We hope to see you there. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Zandra.
My pleasure. I know our interpreters need to go now. I'm happy to stay on a moment if others have other questions, if that's permissible, but I know that our interpreters need to log off.